Just as the guard-side gurgler evolved from a floating crab to the guard-side bug before finally morphing to the guard-side gurgler, fly tyers have continued to add modifications, making this fly one of the most prolific fly patterns. Today's version is intended to target largemouth bass, so it will include a weed guard, flash, rubber legs, and a beefed-up head. You can tie this fly with 2mm craft foam, but I prefer using 3mm foam from Wendy Foam. There, you can get foam sheets from 1 to 12mm in a variety of colors. I'll be tying on a size 4 Sabre 760 bass bug hook. These hooks run notoriously large, so a size 4 is equal to 1/0 in most other brands. But they're also strong, sharp, and at $7 a hundred, they're also a great value. I'm also using barbed wire silicone skirts from Jan's Netcraft for legs. Again, not only do I find them to be superior to other brands, but also a great value. Well, let's get started. Start the thread behind the eye and dress the hook to the hook point. I find that bass flies really need a weed guard, and that a single weed guard works better than most. Cut a 3-inch section of Mason's hard mono for the weed guard. And tie it on top just above the point. Take several tight wraps and continue wrapping down the shank while applying pressure on the mono to keep it on top of the hook. Now remount the hook and continue taking wraps down the shank until you reach a point halfway between the hook shank and the hook point. Now return the thread back up the hook, taking close wraps. Cover the thread wraps with super glue to protect the wraps from sharp teeth. Now remount the hook, being careful not to pinch the weed guard. For the tail, you can either use marabou, Arctic fox, or bucktail. I prefer Arctic fox. It's not as stiff as deer hair and not as wild as marabou. Take a small clump of hair and remove the fluff. Tie it in just above the point, with the tail extending about the length of the shank. Now take some tight wraps to bind the tail to the hook, all the way back to the tying point. Add 5 or 6 strands of green flashabou. Distribute it evenly around the tail. And tie it in at midpoint. Take a few wraps forward. Now fold the flashabou back on itself. Sometimes it just doesn't want to cooperate. but again, distribute it as evenly as possible around the fly. And take some rafts back to the tying point. Trim the marabou just a little bit longer than the tail. For this next step, you can either use marabou or schlappen. I'll be using marabou. Tie in the marabou by the tip. And take 4 or 5 turns, folding the marabou back so that you won't trap any fibers. There's a piece of flash getting in my way here. There's that piece of flash again. Well, they'll take care of that. Keep folding the fibers back and tie it off. Trim off the excess. Now fold all the fibers back and take some rafts back to the tying point. Check the tail and trim off any fibers that may be too long. Advance the thread to about 1/4 inch behind the eye. Tie in the foam strip by the tip and use your fingers to fold the foam evenly on both sides of the shank. Take some rafts back to the tying point, check it. This one needs a few more wraps. And then take some additional tight wraps forward to bind the foam to the shank. I'm using soldier thread, so I don't have to worry about cutting the foam. Now cut off a piece of cactus chenille. I use white generally. This way I can color the chenille any color I want using Sharpies. Tie it in by the tip at the tying point and advance the thread to the end of the foam. Now take some wraps to cover the foam. Brush the fibers back so you don't trap any. And tie it off. And cut off the excess. Take some additional wrap to tidy things up. Now for the wig guard. Tie the mono behind the eye. Take several rasps and pull the mono tight. Cut off the excess about 1/2 inch in front of the eye. Using a cigarette lighter, melt the tip of the mono. Be careful not so it doesn't catch on fire and burn too much. It'll form a little ball on the end. Slide it back until you touches the mono. Check your weed guard length. Mine's a little bit too long, so we'll reheat it. Still too long. That'll do it. Now take some tight wraps to hold the mono in place. Now fold the foam over, pinch it on both sides, and take some wraps behind the eye. Fold the foam back to make the head. Take some additional tight wraps. Again, I'm using soldier thread, so I don't have to worry too much about cutting the foam. Take a few wraps around the eye. Now pinch the foam with your fingers so that both sides are even. And then use your scissors, cutting at a diagonal, forming a nice V in your wing. Also, you'll notice that the foam is now ready to tie the next fly. Tie in 3 rubber legs, a couple loose wraps, move them to the side between the 2 layers of foam. Take 3 more legs, and while holding the other legs out of the way, take several wraps. Now adjust the legs so that they're just between each layer of foam. Holding the other legs back. Take a couple tight wraps. And a few more wraps around the eye. Add some half hitches. And cut the thread. Now grab all the legs without stretching them. And cut them just a little bit below the weed guard. And this fly is ready to fish.